It was supposed to be just another misty dawn in Kansas City, the streets still wet with last night's rain, when Sarah Whitman and her blind shepherd Rex began their quiet patrol. But in less than 5 minutes, the dog's white cloth shifted as his ears caught something no human could sense. He froze before the rusted container at the edge of the yard, growling low, as if the shadows themselves were breathing inside. And Sarah knew. This was no ordinary morning. The morning in Kansas City was one of those damp, bone-soaking dawns where the sky seemed unwilling to lift its heavy gray veil. A fine drizzle fell in sheets so thin they looked like drifting threads of silver, clinging to street lamps, iron railings, and the hoods of early commuters' cars. The Union Station freight yard, a sprawling labyrinth of steel tracks and stacked shipping containers, lay half asleep under this curtain of rain. The air smelled of wet rust, diesel fumes, and the faint sweetness of rain-washed soil. It was the sort of morning where no one lingered outside longer than necessary, except those whose work demanded it. Among them was Officer Sarah Whitman, 35 years old, a patrol officer who carried herself with the quiet composure of someone who had seen more than she wanted to. She was tall, just over 5'9", and built lean, her frame hardened by years in the military before she traded desert fatigues for the navy blue uniform of the Kansas City Police Department. Her hair, the color of chestnuts in late autumn, fell just to her shoulders, though most days it was bound tightly at the nape of her neck so it wouldn't interfere with her duties. This morning, though, with rain slicking her jacket and her hands deep in her leather coat's pockets, a few strands escaped and clung to her cheek. Sarah's eyes were a muted green, thoughtful, watchful, always searching. People often described her as calm but distant. It wasn't that she lacked warmth. She had been known to share a laugh with colleagues or exchange neighborly pleasantries at the grocery store. But something about her kept people at arm's length. Perhaps it was the legacy of her years as a combat medic in Afghanistan, where she learned to measure time by the pulse of trauma and loss, where friendships could be erased in seconds. There had been one particular mission, an IED strike that took the lives of 3 men under her care, that left a scar invisible to the world, but etched permanently in the rhythm of her heart. Since then, trust had not come easily. Duty, however, never faltered. Walking at her side was Rex, a German shepherd unlike any other. Rex was 7 years old, his body still muscular but softened slightly by the gentler pace of recent years. His coat was a blend of sable and black, though streaked now with strands of gray near his muzzle. What made Rex remarkable, however, wasn't his breed or his age, but his blindness. 2 years earlier, a training accident involving shrapnel left his eyes scarred beyond repair. The department might have retired him permanently, but Sarah had refused to let go. Through stubborn determination and months of retraining, Rex learned to adapt, navigating the world through scent, sound, and an uncanny ability to sense human intention. Over his eyes he wore a soft white cloth band, tied neatly behind his ears. Some joked that it made him look like a samurai dog, but to Sarah it was both, a badge of resilience and a warning. Rex's world was dark, but his instincts were sharper than ever. He had developed a sensitivity that sometimes unsettled others. He could tell when someone approached with fear in their chest or malice in their stride, and he responded with unwavering loyalty to Sarah. She often wondered if his blindness had not taken something away, but rather given him another gift, the ability to see the unseen. Their patrol that morning had been routine, circling the freight yard and the outer platforms of Union Station. The drizzle softened the clatter of distant trains, and Sarah kept one hand on Rex's leash, the other resting casually on her duty belt. She hummed faintly under her breath, a habit she had when she wanted to soothe herself, or perhaps to reassure Rex. Most days, Rex walked beside her in steady rhythm, ears swiveling toward each sound, nose lowered as though reading invisible lines on the ground. But today, halfway past a stack of rust-colored containers, Rex froze. Sarah felt the leash jerk taut. She glanced down, expecting a routine distraction, maybe a rat scurrying or the echo of another patrol car. Instead, Rex's posture stiffened, every muscle locked as though he had collided with a wall of tension. His ears thrust forward, his nose lifted, and then a low rumble began in his chest. It wasn't the playful growl of curiosity, but the kind of sound that vibrated with primal certainty. Sarah stopped too, scanning the row of containers. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, though she already trusted his instincts more than her own. Rex turned sharply, paws scraping against wet gravel, and oriented himself toward one container near the far end of the row. It was old, paint peeling from its steel ribs, with numbers faded to illegibility. The padlock on its door was rusted, and the entire structure leaned slightly, as though it had been forgotten for years. To Sarah's eyes, it looked like nothing more than another piece of neglected freight. But Rex began pulling against the leash, claws raking at the ground as he tried to get closer. Sarah's brow furrowed. She tugged gently, but Rex resisted, letting out a high-pitched whine. That whine shifted into a scratching motion, his paws batting the air in the direction of the container. "Easy, Rex," Sarah whispered. Yet she felt her pulse quicken. She had learned long ago not to dismiss him. He had warned her of ambushes overseas, had sat down moments before a roadside bomb detonated, had led her through smoke when her own vision blurred. If Rex said something was wrong, something was wrong. The drizzle thickened into a light rain, pattering against the steel roof of the container, echoing hollowly. The entire yard seemed to hush, as though the world itself leaned in to listen. Sarah adjusted her stance, hand instinctively brushing against the grip of her sidearm. A chill, unrelated to the weather, crawled up her spine. Just a few blocks away, in the warmth of Henderson's coffee house, a man nursed a mug of black coffee while scanning the local paper. Ethan Brooks, age 40, had the restless air of someone who never stayed in one place too long. His hair was sandy blonde, wavy, perpetually unkempt no matter how many times he combed it. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, often slipping down when he leaned forward to scribble notes. He wore a gray wool coat that had seen better days, frayed at the cuffs, over a white shirt rolled at the sleeves. Ethan had made his name as a freelance investigative journalist, chasing stories others deemed too small or too risky. He was not tall, barely 5'8", but he carried himself with an intensity that made him seem larger. His voice was calm, but carried the sharpness of a blade when he asked questions no one wanted to answer. Unlike Sarah, whose distance came from loss, Ethan's came from disillusionment. He had once worked for a major newspaper, but after an exposé about child neglect in foster care was buried under legal pressure, he walked away. Since then, he worked alone, chasing stories that gnawed at his conscience. This morning, his attention was fixed on a troubling trend: reports of missing children in and around Kansas City. The official numbers were vague, the cases scattered, but Ethan had a gut feeling that threads connected them. He tapped his pen against the table, sketching names, dates, locations. Something was wrong, patterns hiding in the ordinary. It was then that he heard it, the faint wail of a police siren slicing through the drizzle outside. Ethan's instincts, honed by years of chasing leads, jolted him to attention. He turned toward the wide cafe window and saw the blur of blue and red lights reflecting off wet pavement near the freight yard. His heart quickened. Sirens at this hour, in this part of the city, were never routine. He grabbed his worn satchel, stuffed with notebooks and a weatherproof camera, and tossed a few crumpled bills on the counter. As he stepped into the rain, he muttered to himself, "Something's happening." "And I need to see it." The drizzle coated his glasses, but Ethan didn't bother wiping them. His stride quickened, his reporter's instincts propelling him toward the source of the siren, toward Union Station's freight yard, unaware that inside, a blind dog was scratching at the truth hidden in rust and steel. Sarah's boots pressed softly into the damp gravel as she approached the rust-streaked container. The drizzle had thickened, clinging to her hair and jacket like a second skin. Rex, taut on the leash, growled with an intensity that made her heart seize. His lips curled back, exposing teeth sharp with age but still capable of commanding fear. The sound reverberated in the hollow yard, blending with the drum of rain against metal. Sarah paused, letting her breath settle, her ears straining. For a moment there was only silence, and then, like the flutter of a bird against glass, a faint whimper reached her. It was fragile, high-pitched, and heartbreakingly human. She froze, her green eyes narrowing. "God," she whispered, her hand tightening around the leash. "There's someone in there." Rex barked suddenly, a sharp report that shattered the misty stillness. Sarah's instincts kicked in. Her radio crackled as she pressed the transmitter to call for backup. "Unit 12, possible victim inside a locked container at Union Station Freight Yard. Request immediate support." Her voice was steady, but her pulse hammered in her ears. The dispatcher's reply came calm, practiced. "Copy, Unit 12. Support en route. ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes, it felt like an eternity. Sarah knew waiting was protocol, but protocol didn't save lives when seconds counted. She slipped her hand to the loop on her belt and pulled out a steel crowbar she often carried for emergencies. Her fingers were slick from rain, but her grip was firm. She approached the container door, the padlock swollen with rust, and wedged the tool into the seam. As she worked, the sound inside shifted. Another whimper, followed by the faint scrape of movement. Her throat tightened. Whoever was inside was alive, but weakening. "Hang on," she muttered under her breath, voice low but urgent. "Just hang on." Rex pressed closer, his wet fur brushing against her leg, his growl softening into a restless whine. With one final heave, the padlock snapped, the container door creaking open on rusted hinges. A burst of stale air rolled out, carrying the smell of sweat, mildew, and something sour that made her stomach twist. Sarah lifted her flashlight and shone it into the dim interior. What she saw made her heart lurch. Curled in the corner, knees tucked to his chest, was a small boy. He could not have been older than 5. His hair was a tangled halo of pale gold, streaked with dirt and sweat. His clothes, once a set of faded jeans and a striped t-shirt, were torn and caked with grime. Duct tape bound his wrists together, and another strip covered his mouth, pressing his lips into a thin, pitiful line. His eyes, wide and shimmering blue, reflected the beam of her flashlight like glass. They blinked rapidly, terrified, yet still searching for hope. Sarah dropped to her knees, setting the crowbar aside. She holstered her weapon to free both hands. "Easy, buddy. You're safe now." Her voice softened, maternal in a way she hadn't heard from herself in years. With delicate precision, she peeled the tape from his mouth. The boy winced as the adhesive pulled at his skin, but he made no sound, just a trembling exhale that rattled his small frame. Rex moved forward, muzzle lowering to nudge the child gently. His blind eyes could not see, but his nose brushed over the boy's bound hands, and a soft whine escaped his throat. The boy blinked at the dog, confusion flickering into something else. Recognition, maybe trust. He shifted ever so slightly, leaning into Rex's warmth. Sarah worked quickly, tearing at the duct tape around his wrists with a small utility knife. The bonds gave way, and the boy's arms sagged into his lap, red welts visible where the tape had bitten into skin. "There," Sarah murmured, her hands trembling despite her effort to stay calm. "You're okay now." The boy's lips parted, but no words came out, only a shallow, rasping breath. He coughed once, weakly, and clutched at the edge of Sarah's sleeve with surprising force for someone so fragile. His grip sent a pang through her chest. She gathered him carefully into her arms, feeling how impossibly light he was, like lifting a bundle of sticks. His body shook with cold. Rain pattered harder outside, beating against her shoulders as she carried him out of the container. She cradled him close, her coat shielding him from the weather as best she could. Rex followed at her heel, tail stiff, ears angled forward, every step protective. Not far away, Ethan Brooks had just arrived at the freight yard. He had jogged the distance from the cafe, camera swinging at his side, his breath visible in the chill air. Through the fog, the sight of flashing blue lights drew him in. He slowed, crouching behind a row of crates, his camera raised. From his vantage, he saw Sarah step into the open with the boy in her arms. The scene framed itself like something out of myth. A weary officer carrying a child from the jaws of darkness, a blind dog walking beside her, the drizzle casting halos of light around them. Ethan snapped photo after photo, the click of his camera barely audible over the rain. He lowered the lens for a moment, staring, the gravity of it sinking in. This wasn't just another lead, another story to chase. His gut told him it was something bigger, something tangled with the missing children he had been chasing in headlines for weeks. This was not coincidence. It was a thread in a much darker tapestry. As Sarah approached her cruiser, paramedics pulled into the lot, sirens cutting abruptly as they parked. 2 EMTs leapt out, one tall and broad-shouldered with cropped hair under his hood, the other a younger woman with freckles and quick, determined movements. Their names flashed on their jackets, Matt Delgado and Holly Pierce. Matt's voice carried, deep but kind. "Officer, we'll take him." Holly already had a blanket ready, her eyes wide with concern. Sarah hesitated a moment, clutching the boy tighter. His small fingers had wrapped into the fabric of her sleeve, refusing to let go. His blue eyes locked onto hers with mute desperation. Sarah's throat ached, but she forced herself to nod. "He's dehydrated, possibly hypothermic." "Be careful." Matt extended his arms, and after gentle coaxing, Sarah eased the child into his grasp. The boy whimpered once, a sound of protest, until Rex nudged his leg again. That seemed to calm him, his tiny hand brushing against the dog's ear, as though anchoring himself to something real. Ethan watched it all unfold, his reporter's mind recording every detail, his conscience whispering that this was not just a photograph for tomorrow's paper. This was the beginning of a story whose ending he could not yet see. Sarah straightened, rain dripping from her chin, and looked around the yard. The container stood silent again, its secrets bared, but her instinct screamed that it was more than an isolated incident. She felt it in the way Rex still sniffed the air, restless, as though danger lingered nearby. She glanced at the boy, now swaddled in the paramedic's blanket, and whispered to herself, "We're not done here." Behind her, Ethan adjusted his camera strap and murmured his own vow under the rain. "This is it. This is the story I was meant to follow." The drizzle continued to fall, indifferent, as the freight yard shifted from silence to urgency, unaware that what had just been pulled from a steel coffin was not only a child, but the first unraveling of a far deeper truth. The fluorescent lights of St. Luke's Children's Hospital buzzed faintly, their sterile glow casting pale reflections on the polished linoleum floors. Rain still tapped against the wide glass windows, streaking them with rivulets that blurred the city beyond. The ambulance had arrived in a storm of urgency, but now the corridors were quieter, though every sound seemed amplified: the squeak of nurses' shoes, the beeping of monitors, the hushed tones of doctors who knew how fragile silence could be. Sarah Whitman sat at the edge of a narrow hospital cot where a boy lay swaddled in a clean blanket. Noah, as the nurses had started calling him in the absence of a name, had woken briefly. His eyes, blue like fractured glass, had opened only long enough to scan the room before retreating inward again. He clutched a small worn teddy bear someone from the ER staff had given him, its fur threadbare but still soft. He held it with such force that his knuckles blanched, as though it were the only thing tethering him to safety. Sarah leaned closer, her green eyes studying the child. Her gaze moved from his pale face to the faint red welts circling his wrists where the duct tape had bound him. The marks were angry and raw, evidence of hours, perhaps days, spent tied. Her jaw tightened. She had seen injuries in war zones, on hardened soldiers, but seeing them on a child's delicate skin struck her like a blade. She brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek and whispered, "Who could do this to you?" Beside the cot, Rex lay sprawled on the floor, head on his paws, ears pricked toward any movement. Though blind, his body remained taut, alert. When a nurse approached, Emily Carter, a young woman with auburn hair tied back in a ponytail and freckles that made her look younger than her 26 years. Rex's ears flicked forward, and he let out a low rumble. Emily froze, her tray of supplies trembling slightly in her hands. Sarah raised a calming hand. "He won't bite," she assured, though her voice carried a weight that told Emily not to test the dog's instincts. Emily nodded quickly, her smile nervous. She had joined the hospital only a year earlier, eager and compassionate, but moments like this reminded her how vulnerable she still felt. She set down the tray and whispered, "We'll monitor his vitals every hour. He's dehydrated, malnourished, but stable. No sign of internal trauma." Sarah gave a curt nod, but her eyes never left Noah. The boy's grip on the bear never loosened. While Sarah kept vigil elsewhere in the city, Ethan Brooks was leaning over a desk in the security office of Union Station. His coat was damp, his glasses smeared with rain, but his hands moved with precision as he scrolled through hours of surveillance footage. The security guard beside him, a middle-aged man with a paunch and tired eyes named Frank Dalton, had hesitated at first. He wasn't supposed to allow outside civilians access to tapes, especially reporters. But Ethan's persistence had worn him down, and perhaps his conscience was pricked by the thought of a child being locked inside a steel coffin. "Here," Ethan muttered, stopping the footage at 5:41 a.m. The screen showed the freight yard under its veil of mist. A figure emerged from the haze, carrying something bulky. Ethan leaned closer. "That's it." The figure was a woman. The camera, positioned at an angle, did not catch her face, but details spoke volumes. She wore a long, weather-beaten coat, its hem brushing her boots. Her hair was tied back tightly, though loose strands clung to her face in the drizzle. But it was her hand that caught Ethan's attention. On her left wrist dangled a pink and white woven bracelet, the kind children made in summer camps or classrooms, a symbol of innocence oddly out of place in this grim context. She set the container down near the bench, hesitated, and glanced over her shoulder. Even without a clear face, the movement conveyed hesitation, almost sorrow. Then she walked away quickly, disappearing into the fog just as a bus pulled in, blocking the camera's view. Ethan scribbled furiously in his notebook. Not a typical abductor. Body language uncertain. She looked back. Remorse. He underlined the word twice, tapping his pen against the paper. Doesn't make sense, Frank muttered, rubbing his chin. If she wanted to hide the kid, why leave him somewhere so obvious? Obvious? Ethan replied, his brow furrowed. Or deliberate. His mind churned. Whoever she was, she hadn't acted like someone discarding a burden. It looked like someone forced to make an impossible choice. He closed the notebook, thanked Frank curtly, and slipped out into the rain again. His path was clear. He had to find Sarah. Back at St. Luke's, Sarah had just finished filing her preliminary report when she sensed someone behind her. She turned sharply, hand brushing her holster, only to find Ethan standing in the doorway, dripping water onto the sterile tile. His gray coat was soaked, glasses fogged, camera slung against his chest. Sarah's expression hardened instantly. "Press," she said flatly, her voice like cold steel. Ethan lifted his hands in a gesture of peace. "Not here to make headlines," he insisted, his voice low but firm. "I think we're chasing the same truth." Sarah stood, her tall frame straightening, shoulders squared. She towered over him slightly, her presence commanding. "This boy doesn't need to be splashed across the evening news. He needs protection, and I won't let anyone exploit him." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance. "I saw the footage," he said, pulling his notebook from his coat. A woman left him there. Long coat, hair tied back, bracelet on her wrist. She looked back. "Officer, that's not how a predator behaves." Sarah's eyes flicked briefly toward Noah, who had curled deeper into his blanket. The bear clutched tighter than ever. She swallowed. The image of the woman Ethan described scraped against her instincts. A woman. A bracelet, regret in her movements. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, suspicion lacing her words. "Because," Ethan said quietly, "this isn't just another crime. It's bigger." I don't think she's the villain. Sarah studied him, trying to read his intent. His eyes, sharp behind his fogged glasses, carried conviction but not arrogance. He truly believed what he was saying. Still, she wasn't ready to trust him. "You've had your say," she replied curtly, stepping toward him. "Now leave. If you print a word about this boy, I'll make sure you regret it." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He gave a short nod, retreating. But as he left, he murmured just loud enough for her to hear, "You'll see, I'm right." Sarah remained standing in the doorway, her chest tight, watching his silhouette vanish down the hall. She turned back to Noah, who now slept fitfully, the bear clutched like a shield. Rex shifted on the floor, ears twitching, as if he too sensed that shadows lingered far beyond the hospital walls. Sarah's thoughts churned. A woman had left the boy, a bracelet of innocence wrapped around a wrist carrying such a burden. The question burned hotter now. Who would do this to a child, and why? The Missouri countryside stretched outward in a quilt of rain-soaked fields and dense timberland, the kind of wilderness that swallowed sound and seemed to bend time. Morning mist clung stubbornly to the trees, weaving through branches like smoke from an invisible fire. Sarah Whitman guided her cruiser down a muddy service road that veered off the main highway, the vehicle jolting with each rut. Rex sat in the back seat, posture rigid, his nose twitching against the scent she had let him smell earlier, a worn shirt Noah had been wearing when they pulled him from the container. Sarah had been quiet for most of the drive, her mind turning over questions she couldn't yet answer. The boy hadn't spoken, but his silence carried weight. It was as if every movement, every glance, whispered fragments of a story she had yet to piece together. And now, following Rex's insistent cues, She was hunting for more than evidence. She was hunting for truth. They parked near the edge of the woods. Sarah opened the back door, and Rex leapt down, paws splattering mud, ears tilting forward like antennae. His white cloth band hung damp over his blind eyes, but his movements were purposeful. He lowered his muzzle to the shirt again, inhaled deeply, then pulled forward with quiet certainty. "All right, partner," Sarah murmured, adjusting her black leather jacket against the chill. "Show me where he's been." They trekked into the woods, boots crunching through wet leaves, the forest alive with the sound of dripping branches. Sarah moved with the cautious stride of someone who had learned in war that ambush could come from anywhere. Though she was alone now, her bearing carried the memory of comrades lost, men whose trust she had once shouldered like armor. Rex kept her tethered to the present, his leash taut as he navigated terrain he could not see but somehow understood better than sighted eyes. After nearly an hour of weaving through tangled paths, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a weathered log cabin, its roof partially caved, smoke-blackened timbers suggesting fire damage from long ago. Ivy crawled up its sides, windows shattered, the door hanging by a single rusted hinge. Sarah approached cautiously, hand brushing the grip of her service pistol. The cabin seemed deserted, but silence in such places often masked stories better left unspoken. She nudged the door open. Hinges squealed in protest, echoing into the hollow space inside. The air was stale, tinged with the mustiness of old paper and damp wood. Sunlight filtered through broken slats, illuminating dust motes that floated like spirits. Sarah's eyes adjusted, sweeping the room. Her breath caught when she saw the walls. Children's drawings were tacked haphazardly across the boards. Crude figures in crayon, stick figure boys, houses with crooked roofs, suns with exaggerated smiles. Among them were repeated sketches of a dog, its tail wagging, often labeled with a shaky scrawl. Scout. Sarah's chest tightened. She stepped closer, fingertips brushing over one paper that showed a child with blonde hair standing beside a large shepherd. The resemblance to Noah was unmistakable. She exhaled slowly. "You lived here," she whispered, as though speaking directly to the absent boy, "and someone loved you enough to let you draw." Rex padded toward the far corner, nose bumping against one of the papers on the floor. It depicted the same dog, Scout, drawn larger, almost heroic. Rex's tail gave a small wag, the first sign of joy Sarah had seen from him since the container. She crouched and stroked his head. "Feels like you know him, huh?" she murmured. Books lay scattered across the floor. Children's storybooks with curled pages, fairy tales with faded covers, even an old volume about German shepherds. A small mattress sat in one corner, threadbare blanket still folded. Sarah knelt beside it, fingers brushing the worn fabric, her heart heavy. Whoever had brought Noah here had not treated him like a prisoner. This place bore the marks of shelter, not cruelty. On the wall above the mattress, crudely scrawled in charcoal, was a phrase, "Keep him safe." The handwriting was shaky, uneven, but its intent screamed louder than any evidence report. Sarah stood, swallowing hard. The pieces were shifting. This was no simple case of abduction. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Brooks was hunched over a desk at the Kansas City Public Records Office. Stacks of faded folders and newspaper clippings spread around him. His tie was loosened, his sandy hair in disarray, glasses sliding down his nose. He scribbled notes furiously, the detective's instinct in him as strong as any cop's. He had traced the bracelet clue through photographs of volunteers at local shelters. It took hours, but finally he found her. Claire Morgan. The picture was from 5 years earlier, in a small-town Gazette feature about a children's advocacy group. Claire stood tall, in her late 20s then, with light brown hair pulled into a practical bun, her expression soft yet defiant. She had been praised as a dedicated volunteer for child protection programs, often working with foster kids. But the trail of her name after 2019 vanished. Digging deeper, Ethan found a report buried in archives. Claire Morgan had filed a complaint against a state official, accusing him of covering up repeated child abuse in a foster home. The case had quietly disappeared, her allegations dismissed as unsubstantiated. Weeks later, she resigned, then disappeared altogether. Ethan tapped his pen against the page, murmuring aloud, "She didn't vanish. She ran." With him his notes grew sharper. Not abduction, protective. System ignored her. She took matters into her own hands. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the rush of a story that mattered beyond headlines. His conscience wrestled with the risk. If he printed her name, she'd be hunted. If he stayed quiet, a child's safety might hang in the balance. He knew he needed Sarah's trust, but her rejection earlier still stung. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Claire Morgan, where are you now?" Back at the cabin, Sarah stood in the center of the one-room space, her breath steady but heavy. She took photographs with her department-issued camera, every image further convincing her that Noah had not been abandoned by cruelty, but by desperation. Rex whined softly, paw brushing against the mattress. Sarah crouched, smoothing her hand over his back. "We're not chasing a monster," she whispered, voice hushed, almost reluctant to admit it aloud. "We're chasing someone who thought this was the only way left." She stepped back into the fading light of the clearing, the cabin looming behind her like a memory carved into wood and ash. The Missouri forest closed around them again, the trail stretching deeper into questions that no badge could easily answer. The afternoon sun slanted low across the Missouri fields, stretching golden light over weeds and broken fences. Sarah Whitman pulled her cruiser to the edge of a gravel drive that led to a crumbling farmhouse, its red paint faded to pink and its shutters hanging loose. Rex, blind but alert, lifted his head from the back seat, nose twitching at something faint but familiar. Sarah felt the weight of the day in her bones, but her focus remained razor-sharp. This place matched the lead Ethan had dug up, a farmhouse long abandoned, but recently used. Ethan Brooks stood waiting near the porch, his gray coat darker at the hem from morning rain. He had driven separately, unable to resist following his instincts. He looked tired but resolved, camera slung at his side like an extension of himself. When Sarah stepped out, her black leather jacket catching the last glint of sunlight, he gave her a short nod. "You sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice low, carrying both doubt and determination. Sarah adjusted her grip on Rex's leash. "I don't do sure, I do necessary." Before they could approach, the screen door creaked open. A woman stepped into view, her presence both unexpected and strangely calm. She was in her early 30s, tall and lean, with hair once chestnut, now streaked with sun-faded strands, tied loosely at the back. Her clothes were practical, a long coat frayed at the cuffs, boots caked in dried mud. But it was her eyes that drew Sarah's attention, a tired softness rimmed with shadows but steady. She didn't move to flee, didn't raise her hands defensively. She simply looked at them and said in a voice that trembled only slightly, "I left him there because I knew only a dog would find him fast enough." The admission cut through the air like glass. Sarah stiffened, Ethan's pen already poised above his notebook. "You're Claire Morgan," Sarah said firmly. Claire gave the faintest nod, her gaze flicking down to Rex, His white cloth fluttered slightly in the breeze, and she allowed herself the smallest smile. "You did, didn't you? You found him." Sarah stepped closer, her boots crunching on gravel. "Why?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. Claire's breath shuddered out. "Because I couldn't keep running." He was being watched, we both were. If I stayed, they would have taken him back. I had one choice left. Leave him somewhere I knew a K-9 would notice. I gambled on instinct. Her shoulders sagged as she spoke, the strength holding her upright slowly unraveling. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You took him from someone." "Who?" Claire's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "His father." A man eaten alive by meth and rage, a man who broke bottles against the walls while the boy hid under the table. I tried every legal path. I reported him. I begged child services. They buried it. They told me it wasn't enough. So I took him. I thought I could keep him safe. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she swallowed it down. She stood tall again, defiant even in confession. Ethan scribbled quickly, his eyes darting up. "You're saying you kidnapped him to save him." Claire turned her gaze on him, eyes hardening. "Don't twist it. I rescued him when the system refused. But you'll call it whatever sells best, won't you?" For once, Ethan didn't flinch. He closed his notebook, shaking his head. "No, not this time." Sarah's thoughts whirled, but she saw truth written in Claire's exhaustion, in the trembling of her hands, in the way her eyes softened when she spoke of Noah. She lowered her voice. "He's safe now. That's what matters." Weeks later, the courthouse in Kansas City carried the smell of dust and old paper, its chambers heavy with the weight of lives decided within. Claire stood before the judge in a plain gray dress borrowed from a public defender's office, her wrists bound but her chin lifted. Lawyers spoke in measured tones, presenting evidence of abduction and counter-arguments about intent. Sarah sat in the back row with Noah, now cleaner, stronger, a faint spark returning to his eyes. Rex lay stretched at their feet, his ears flicking at every sudden sound. The judge's words echoed. "Given the extraordinary circumstances and documented failures of the welfare system, the court considers mitigating factors. Miss Morgan will serve community supervision and mandated counseling. No further prison sentence is ordered." Claire closed her eyes, shoulders trembling, but relief softened her expression. More importantly, the judge turned his gaze to Sarah. "Temporary guardianship of the child, Noah, will be granted to Officer Sarah Whitman until a permanent arrangement is determined." Sarah's chest tightened, her eyes flicking down to the boy at her side. He looked up at her with wide blue eyes and whispered the first word she had heard from him since the night of the rescue. "Mom." It was barely audible, fragile as a bird's wing, but it cracked something open in her. She reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "I've got you," she whispered back. That evening, headlines lit up across the state. Ethan's article ran under the title, "The Blind Dog Who Saw the Truth." The story traced not just Noah's ordeal, but the failures of the system that allowed it, the courage of a woman who defied it, and the bond between a veteran cop and her blind dog that saved a child. His words carried weight, not sensationalism, and soon calls rang out demanding reform in child welfare services. Ethan sat at his desk, coffee cooling beside him, a rare smile tugging at his mouth. For once, he knew he had written not for fame, but for justice. At Sarah's modest two-bedroom home, life found rhythm again. Toys slowly cluttered the living room, coloring books spread across the coffee table. Noah laughed more often now, chasing Rex through the hallway. The shepherd, though blind, moved with uncanny awareness, his tail wagging as the boy's footsteps padded close. He had become more than protector. He was guardian, shadow, and friend. On one quiet evening, rain tapping lightly against the porch roof, Sarah sat on the swing, Noah nestled beside her under a blanket. Rex sprawled at their feet, the white cloth over his eyes fluttering gently as he breathed. Noah giggled, pointing at the dog's ears, twitching at distant sounds. His laughter was pure, unguarded, the sound of healing. Ethan stood across the street for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching. He didn't intrude. He only smiled, content to have borne witness, content that his words had carried the truth where it needed to go. Sarah glanced at Noah, brushing his blonde hair back, and whispered, "You're safe. You're home." And for the first time, the boy believed her. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or lightning, but in the quiet instinct of a blind dog, or in the courage of a woman who chooses love over fear. Noah was not only rescued by human hands, but by something greater guiding those moments. It is a reminder that God places protectors in our lives in many forms, often when we least expect it. In our everyday lives, we may not stand before an old farmhouse or open a rusted container, but we all face moments where someone needs us to listen, to act, or to believe. Trust your instincts. Trust the quiet voice of compassion, for it may be the way God works through you. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of hope. Leave a comment below and tell us what you felt. And if you believe, as we do, that God used Sarah, Rex, and even Ethan to protect Noah, then write Amen in the comments as a prayer for all the children who still need saving today. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of faith, courage, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. May God bless you and keep you safe wherever you are.